In December of 2002, one of my closest friends, Alden, was tying the knot. I'd moved away from the peninsula a few years earlier and had never met his fiancée, but apparently they'd been together for quite a while. Against my advice, he'd enlisted in the Marines and was marrying her just before shipping out for his first tour in Iraq. My other two best friends, Thane and Soren, came back to our old hometown of Port Angeles for the wedding too. We had a blast the night before, partying it up, and woke up early to make the 50-mile drive to Forks for the courthouse ceremony. Things kicked off on the wrong foot when a tire on my car blew out not long into the trip. We had to limp the rest of the way on my spare, crawling along at under 20 miles an hour, and damn near showed up late. But we made it, and they had a sweet little ceremony before we all headed to the bride's grandmother's house for the reception. The celebration stretched on well past dark. Driving back to Port Angeles on that spare tire wasn't an option. It was overcast, foggy, and pitch black out there, with no streetlights on the highway between Forks and Port Angeles. My car was small and black, and we'd already had close calls with speeding cars in broad daylight, so there was no way I was risking it at night. Problem was, I couldn't get a new tire in Forks that late. Everything was closed, so we were stuck figuring out where to crash until morning. The bride asked if we could stay at her grandmother's place, but the old lady flat out refused, saying she was scared of what we might do to her in the night. Clearly, she was off her rocker. It was way too cold to sleep in the car, and I'd blown too much cash the night before, being the best man and all, so we couldn't scrape together enough for a hotel room. Then the bride suggested her other grandma's cabin. That grandma had passed away a few months back, and her vacant cabin out toward La Push was just sitting there. Out of nowhere, Thane piped up, "No way in hell I'm staying there. I'm catching the last bus back to Port Angeles. See you tomorrow," and bolted out the door without another word. That should have been a red flag something was off, but I couldn't ditch my car, so I was stuck. I grabbed my stuff, and Alden and his new wife drove Soren and me to the dead grandma's cabin, about 15 minutes outside of town. It was in the middle of nowhere. They called it a cabin, but it was more like a two-story house. There was a lamp in the driveway, but beyond that, everything was swallowed up in darkness. Alden and his bride let us inside and poked around with us. Most of the furniture had already been cleared out by her family. In the kitchen, there was just a card table and a few metal chairs. Upstairs, in the only bedroom, stood a wardrobe completely empty, its contents dumped in a heap on the floor, forming a man-sized nest of clothes. "My uncle uses this place as a hunting lodge sometimes," she explained. "He's a little nuts, still torn up over Grandma's death. If he finds you here, he'll lose his shit, so you might want to hide. But he keeps a stash of Pepsi and beer in the fridge, so help yourselves." Soren and I felt exactly how you'd expect, creeped out as hell, but at that point, it was either stay in the cabin with heat or freeze our asses off outside. Alden and his wife took off to enjoy their wedding night, leaving Soren and me to figure out where we'd hide if that crazy uncle showed up. We found a set of retractable stairs leading to the attic, where there were a couple of dusty, stained mattress covers, some old handmade quilts, and the dried-out husks of 1,000 dead bugs. We decided to pull up the stairs and hole up in the attic for the night. Apparently, the unhinged uncle liked sleeping in a pile of his dead mom's clothes. The kitchen had no knives, but I spotted a wood-splitting maul on the back porch, so we hauled it upstairs with us, just in case. In my backpack, I still had a couple of malt liquors left over from the night before. With no TV, radio, or anything else to kill time, Soren and I sat on the mattresses, sipping Mad Dog 2020 and reminiscing about old times, especially all the trouble Alden had gotten himself into this time. Without a clock, we lost track of time and built up a decent buzz. Then we heard something that snapped us sober real quick, a noise like the downstairs doorknob being rattled hard. Wide-eyed, we stared at each other, listening. It happened a few more times. I crept to the window and peeked out quick to see if there was a car in the lamplit driveway. Nothing. We sat there quiet for a bit, hearing nothing else, and started talking again, until we were cut off by what sounded like the fridge slamming shut and chairs scraping across the floor. No voices, just noises. I grabbed them all and waited at the top of the retracted stairs. As suddenly as it started, it stopped. We sat in silence, but nothing else came. We were freaked out, couldn't sleep, and eventually got bored enough to start whispering again. I don't know how long it was after the chair noises, without a watch to tell, but then the phone started ringing. We waited for it to stop, or for someone downstairs to pick it up, but it just kept going, way past what any normal person would let it ring. I figured if the crazy uncle was down there, he'd have answered by now, so we were probably alone. The only people who knew we were here were Alden and his wife, and with how long it was ringing, I thought it might be an emergency. I lowered the stairs, maul in hand, ready for an attack. Nothing came. No one was at the bottom, and the kitchen was empty. I walked to the still ringing phone and picked it up. The ringing stopped, but there was no dial tone, just dead silence. I looked at it closer. It wasn't even plugged in. It was an old rotary phone with a mechanical bell, probably from the 60s. It just sat there, quiet. I hit the bathroom, went back upstairs, and told Soren about the phone. He thought I was screwing with him, but I swore I wasn't and told him to check it out himself. Soren was sufficiently freaked. He had to piss but was too scared to go downstairs, so he peed out the second floor window into the freezing night. The window got stuck open, and it was cold as fuck. I was spooked and pissed off. Then the phone started ringing again. We sat there counting the rings. I got up to 170 before I gave up. No way was I going back down to answer an unplugged phone. I flopped onto the mattress, listening to it ring, and eventually passed out. Come morning, Soren and I woke up early, freezing our asses off. We had no clue when Alden would come get us, but we figured we'd hunt for another phone. The night before, I'd heard that unplugged one ring right in front of me, but I wasn't buying it now. We searched the whole place, only one phone on the property, that same unplugged one in the kitchen. I checked it out, no batteries, no dial tone, nothing. Just a dead, ordinary phone. I'm an outdoorsman, pretty damn experienced with hunting, camping, hiking, and general survival. I've spent a lot of time in the wild, and I know my way around wildlife. But back in June of 2007, I had an encounter that I'm convinced was with something called a dog man, a cryptid, not some regular animal. It charged me and my cousin Torin, and I swear it wasn't a bear. A bear can't move like that thing did. And it sure as hell wasn't a normal wolf. Wolves don't run comfortably on two legs. But whatever this was, it seemed built for it. Let me break it down. This happened in northwest Wisconsin, where my family used to own a cabin. I was about 17 then, a little cocky but still knew my shit when it came to the outdoors. I practically grew up at that cabin every summer, so I knew those woods like the back of my hand. At night, though, you stayed inside, or at least close to the bonfire by the beach, because of bears, wolves, and cougars. One of the creepiest things was sitting at the fire pit, the tree line just visible in the dark, and always feeling like something was watching you from out there. During the day, the woods felt normal, not so eerie, until that incident. It went down sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. Torin and I were messing around, having an airsoft battle. I was decked out in full woodland camo, he wasn't. I'd retreated onto the ATV trail running through the woods to get a tactical edge, and our little skirmish took us maybe 200 meters up the trail, about a third of the way along it. We'd had enough by then, and were standing at the edge of a clearing, catching our breath and talking. He was maybe 10 feet from me when I decided to screw with him. I shushed him and whispered, "We're being watched." He froze. Then I noticed how dead quiet the woods had gone. No bugs, no birds, nothing, and I started getting spooked myself. I scanned the tree line and the far edge of the clearing, sweeping my eyes left to right. That's when I saw it. Its teeth caught my eye first. It was panting, staring right at Torin. I don't expect you to believe me, but what I saw was a wolf as big as a black bear, at least 300 pounds, except it wasn't normal. This thing was crouched on two legs next to a tree, one arm, or whatever you'd call it, gripping the trunk with a clawed hand. Its fur was reddish-brown, and it was locked onto Torin like a predator sizing up prey. I muttered, "We gotta go," and next thing I knew, Torrin was booking it. I glanced back at the thing, let's call it Wolfie, and it took a few more steps toward us. When I turned to run, I saw it drop to all fours and charge, crashing through the brush like it was nothing. It was right on our asses, or at least it sounded that way, but for some reason, it let us go when we broke out of the tree line and sprinted for the cabin. What stuck with me most was its size. When it was upright, Wolfie looked damn near 7 feet tall. And where it should have had front paws, it had these big, clawed hands instead. I can't rationalize it away. I've heard wolves can kinda hobble upright sometimes, but they don't sprint on 2 legs like that, and they sure as hell don't get that big. Black bears waddle when they stand, not run like this thing did. The closest thing I can compare it to, and I know it sounds ridiculous, is a werewolf or a dog. My name's Eldon, by the way. That's all I've got to say about it. Torrin and I made it back to the cabin, and we never talked about it after. I don't know if he backed me up on this now, but I'll never forget what I saw. It wasn't just some animal, it felt unnatural, like something that didn't belong out there. Last summer, my good friend Rune and I set out on a backpacking trip through the White Mountain National Forest in New Hampshire. We were pretty seasoned day hikers and felt ready to tackle the whites for our first overnight adventure. While planning, Rune thought it'd be cool to hike back to a remote campsite to spice up our first night in the wilderness. I wasn't about to argue. Stunning views, historic trails, and a quiet night in the dry river wilderness sounded perfect. I was pumped, to say the least. Before any hiking trip, I always do a bit of online digging about the trails or shelters we'll hit. Back in the mid to late 1900s, there were a bunch of lean-tos scattered along the dry river wilderness, built for backpackers or through hikers looking to get away from the crowds in the busier parts of the forest. Over time, though, the Forest Service let most of them fall apart or tore them down, except for Dry River Shelter Number 3, the last one standing in that wilderness zone. On the morning of our hike, I met Rune at the trailhead, and we started off. The sky was overcast, with thick fog blanketing the forest, killing our visibility and any hope of those killer views. At least the trail gave us some prime New England rock scrambling alongside the Ammonoosuc River to keep things interesting. Rune and I made it up to the Presidential Ridge, stopping by the Lakes of the Clouds. The hut there was buzzing with day hikers, backpackers, and through hikers all chatting it up. We even got a brief reward. Some sun broke through, giving us a quick peek at the dry river valley from the summit of Mount Monroe before the fog rolled back in. With the views fading and a stiff wind picking up, Rune and I hustled back below the tree line, heading down to Dry River Shelter Number 3, our spot for the night. Once we dropped off the ridge into the valley, we entered the wilderness zone. Rangers barely patrol it, and it's about as wild as it gets. All signs of civilization vanished, the trail was overgrown as hell, and even though it had been raining all week, there wasn't a single footprint in the mud. No human or animal tracks either. I figured we'd have some peaceful isolation at least. After about an hour of trudging downhill, Rune spotted the lean-to just as our legs were begging for a break. It was a gorgeous old timber setup with a well-worn fire pit right by a cold mountain river, textbook pristine camping. As we settled in and poked around the site, I found a small, beat-up notebook tucked in a corner of the shelter. On the cover, someone had scrawled, Dry River Shelter Number 3. Curious, I flipped it open, but all I found was a single guy's name scribbled on the first page with a date, your typical camping log. Weird thing was, the date was from the day before, but we hadn't seen any footprints or signs of anyone, or anything on the trails or at the shelter. Rain might have washed away tracks, sure, but it shouldn't have erased every trace of life. Something felt off. I showed it to Rune, who thought it was odd but didn't dwell on it. He figured the guy was probably some grizzled hiking pro who knew how to leave no trace. I bought into that just to calm my nerves. As the sun dipped, we got a solid fire going by the riverbank. Rune noted how quiet the place was. We hadn't seen another soul since leaving the Crawford path, just the occasional chirp of birds. The silence was creepy, but we chalked it up to being too used to city noise dulling our senses. The sun set, and we got tired fast. Rune took the lean-to. I crashed in my tent. After hiking over 8 miles with 20 pounds on my back, sleep hit me quick, but it didn't last out. A sharp, brutal slapping noise jolted me awake. The best I can compare it to is someone swinging a 2x4 into a tree or snapping a thick branch. I figured it was a bear rummaging for our food bag, which we'd hung in a tree 20 to 50 yards off. Nothing crazy for New Hampshire. I drifted back to sleep, and next thing I remember, the sun was rising over the peaks. I stumbled out of my tent as Rune was waking up too, moving slow. We made oats and coffee, and I wandered around the site to see if I could spot any marks from that bear. Instead, I noticed something weird. The little notebook was open. I swear I put it back where I found it, closed and shoved in the corner, not lying open on the floor. "Hey, Rune, were you messing with this camp log last night?" I called out. "No way, man. There's nothing to read in there anyway." "You sure?" He shot back. I bent down to pick it up, and that lone hiker's name wasn't so lonely anymore. At least 20 new names filled the pages. The original guy's name was now buried several pages in. I tossed it to Rune, and his face dropped the second he saw it. "Dude, we must have been seeing things last night. No way we missed all these names. How the hell could we?" Rune said. That's when I told him about the slapping noise I'd heard. He shut it down fast, didn't want to hear it. "It's a bear, Kieran. Just a bear. Let it go," he said, real firm. So we did. Rune led us out of the site, and we headed home. Not 10 minutes later, a year's passed, and I still don't know what the hell happened at night at Dry River Shelter number 3. I can picture that single name on the first page so clearly. I couldn't have screwed that up, could I? The noises, the new names in the book, it's all stuck with me. Rune feels the same way, even if you won't admit it. What do you think? Were we not welcome in that New Hampshire wilderness? I had an encounter with what I'm pretty sure was a dogman back when I lived in Southern California, up in the San Gabriel Mountains, a couple hours east of LA. People always think of California as just beaches, but trust me, the terrain out here is wild and varied. My hometown was tiny, with a decently popular ski resort on the west side. If you take the only highway out past the resort for a few miles, it's nothing but forest, some campgrounds, a couple day-use spots, a few Forest Service buildings, and an old gold mine. Beyond that, it's just national forest for miles, interrupted only by one weird, isolated restaurant that somehow still operates, then back to endless trees. Just setting the scene for you. I was about 10 or 11 when it happened, right around Christmas. It had snowed a lot that year, and it was coming down pretty good that evening. My stepdad, Gavin, decided we'd go cut our own tree. He piled me into my mom's big Dodge truck, and we headed toward the mine, a few miles past the ski resort. We got to the base of the road, laughing and talking as he drove slow through the snow. They'd plowed part of it recently, so there were these huge snow berms on both sides, damn near up to the top of the truck cap, probably 8 feet high. It was barely getting dark, more like twilight, and with the snow falling, we couldn't see much. The truck's headlights were on, cutting through the haze. Then, out of nowhere, this massive dark shape came arcing over the snow berm on my side. It landed smack in the middle of the road, smooth as hell, and Gavin slammed on the brakes. We were too stunned to scream or even speak. Crouching there was what I can only describe as a goddamn werewolf. No other way to put it. It had a long muzzle and pointy ears, sharper than a dog's or wolf's, covered in fur. Its paws weren't normal. They were long, with digits ending in claws, not quite hands but not just paws either, kinda like a raccoon's. I don't even remember if it had a tail. It was huge, built strong, and looked like it could rip anything apart. This all went down in seconds. The thing landed in a crouch, flicked its head toward us for a split second. Gavin still frozen with his foot on the brake, then vaulted up over the berm on the left side like it was nothing. It didn't even need to push off hard. It just crouched on its hind legs and leapt, easy as that. If it stood upright, I guess it was 6 or 7 feet tall, maybe more. Terrifying doesn't even cover it. Even though the whole thing was over quick, Gavin wouldn't talk about it after. I asked if he'd seen the same thing. I knew he had to, with how fast he hit the brakes and how his eyes went wide, sweat breaking out on his face. He just shut me down, refused to say a word. I never brought it up again. We didn't have the best relationship anyway, and I haven't talked to him since he and my mom split up. My name's Lauren, by the way. I still think about that night sometimes, and I've been tempted to reach out to Gavin just to ask, but I don't know if it'd be worth it or if he even remembers. Me, though, I can't forget it. That image is burned into my head for good. I work for a well-known university as a field biologist, and recently, I got contracted out to the National Forest Service for my first gig with them. They'd send me GPS coordinates, and I'd either drive or hike to the spot to do whatever they needed, setting up trail cameras, door counters, monitoring gear, doing trail surveys, that kind of thing, then record the data 24 hours later. Easy enough, I thought. I did find it weird they wanted the cameras placed just 3 feet off the ground, and some of the infrared ones in the trees had specific heights. Some spots were on marked trails, but others were way off the beaten path, places no sane person would wander. Sometimes there's no hotel or lodging nearby. These are remote mountain areas, so the Forest Service hooked me up with some damn nice camping gear for when I'd have to sleep out there. I'm no rookie. I've spent plenty of nights alone in the wild thanks to my job. I'm Sylvie, by the way, 5'6", about 130 pounds, and not much scares me. The Forest Service gave me an emergency beacon that'd bring every cop in the area running if I needed it. So I felt pretty solid. I'd been assigned to this district for a few months and was loving it. It's a pristine, untouched chunk of land. That's why I do this job. I get to see stuff most people never will, and I'd had some truly amazing, almost spiritual moments out there. That is, until a few nights ago. I was working near one of the highest points in the state, a maze of trails, wilderness zones, and campsites. It had been snowing, with howling winds and ice storms tearing through, and I was camping out to finish my work. The conditions were brutal, but I was almost enjoying the challenge. That first night in the woods was calm enough. I cooked dinner, set up camp, sipped some whiskey, smoked some good weed, then burrowed into my sleeping bag and slept like a rock. It was freezing, but I've got this turtle fur face mask that keeps the cold off my face, so I didn't mind. I woke up at dawn, stoked the fire back up, and started some coffee. That's when I noticed all this churned up snow around my campsite, not tracks, just kicked around snow, like something or someone had been messing with it. Odd, but whatever. I had a 15-mile hike ahead to set some cameras, so I didn't have time to poke around. I hit the trail, did my job, and headed back. It was dark by the time I got to camp, and I was too wiped to do anything but strip to my base layer, crawl into my sleeping bag, and pass out. Around 2 a.m., I bolted awake because I heard voices, people talking. I was 30 miles up a gravel road locked with Forest Service gates, 10 miles from where I'd parked my truck, and I was hearing voices. I lost my shit. I've got a firearm, so I quietly grabbed it from my pack, slipped back into my sleeping bag, cocked it, and waited, every sense on high alert. The voices faded eventually, and I couldn't hear them anymore, but I didn't sleep a wink after that .at first light. I crawled out of my tent and saw more churned up snow. Then I noticed my 2 trail cameras, the ones I'd hung in a tree 5 feet from my tent, were back at my campsite. I'd placed those 15 miles away the day before. I packed up fast as hell and hauled ass to my truck. Along the way, I saw human boot tracks all over near my camp. When I got to my truck, it had been broken into, my computer and some gear were gone. I'm holed up in a fancy log cabin at some resort now, too freaked out to go back for my other equipment and too embarrassed to tell my superiors how scared I am. The Forest Service got me a new truck while my old one's getting its window fixed, and I filed a report about the theft. But no way in hell am I going back to that site. Eventually, I sucked it up and went back to grab my gear. But I took my friend Torrin with me. He's a former Marine. The equipment I'd placed was fine, untouched, but those 2 cameras that had been near my campsite, both were missing their memory cards. I didn't tell my supervisors how terrified I was, just said someone had messed with the cameras and swiped the cards. I also asked to never be sent back to that spot again. I'll still work the area, but nowhere near that remote. I'm hoping it was just some punk teens looking to steal and screw with me. Everyone I've met around here has been super nice, even if most of them hate the National Forest Service. I don't know if this will get me fired or stuck at a desk, but in all my years working national forests across the country, this is the most scared I've ever been. Animals? I've got stories, and they don't faze me. People, though, that's what I'm afraid of. This happened 3 years ago, mid-July. I was living in Montana, just outside a small rural town with maybe 2,000 people. My name's Riven, and I was staying in a little one-floor ranch house by myself. My nearest neighbor was a farmer a mile off, and up until this whole mess, I hadn't had any weird run-ins. But the woods near my place always had this heavy, ominous vibe. Not long after moving in, I figured out why the previous homeowners bailed so fast. I started hearing noises out there, not just regular forest sounds, but blood-curdling screams and growls. I looked it up and learned that even something like a raccoon or a bobcat can make some freaky-ass noises, so I told myself that's all it was. Still, it never sat right. It's hard to pin down, but I'd never felt anything like it before. Something about those woods in my house just made me uneasy, like I was always being watched. The first thing I couldn't explain happened about 2 weeks after I settled in. There was a thunderstorm rolling through, loud enough to keep me up. I've never been big on storms when I'm alone. The lightning was wild, lighting up the whole area for a split second at a time. I was lying on the couch and got up to grab a drink from the sink. It was around 2 a.m., I think. There's a little window above the sink that looks out over my yard and up to the tree line. When the next flash hit, I saw it. It wasn't a long look, but it was enough. Something was near the trees, just a few steps into my yard. At first, I thought it was a bear, but no, it was standing on 2 legs, facing the house. Its legs were bent like a dog's, with those hock joints you'd see on a canine. The fur looked dark, hard to tell the exact color, and its upper body was massive, wide torso, arms long enough to brush the ground even while standing. The weirdest part was how its upper half seemed to dwarf its lower half, like it was built all wrong. I stood there, frozen, waiting for the next lightning strike. When it flashed again, the thing was gone. It had happened so fast and vanished just as quick. After that, I bought a gun and kept it within reach when I slept. The next encounter was the scariest damn thing I've ever been through. For a few weeks after that night, nothing big happened, just quiet. I don't get cable out there, and one night I was watching something when my satellite started acting up. I hated going outside after dark, but it had been calm lately, and I figured it'd be a quick fix. I grabbed my gun and flashlight and stepped out. Right away, I noticed how eerie and still it was. No crickets, no frogs, nothing, even though the woods should have been alive with noise this time of year. I pushed down the creeping fear and went to tweak the antenna. Then I heard it, a small snap, like a twig breaking. I turned slow, shining my light toward the sound, and what I saw will haunt me forever. These blood-red eyes stared back at me, pure evil. The head looked like a twisted German shepherd's, with a long snout and sharp, pointed ears. I hate saying it, but it was like a goddamn werewolf. The fur was black and shaggy in spots, and its body was ripped, muscles bulging, bigger than any human I've ever seen. It was half in, half out of the woods, crouched down, and even then, it was about 6 feet tall. Standing straight, it had easily hit 8 feet. I was maybe 20 feet away, and I didn't even think about my gun. I'd brought it for protection, but looking back, my little .223 rounds probably would have just pissed it off before it ripped me apart. I backed up slow, never breaking eye contact. It didn't move. I grabbed my gun off the ground, and my fight or flight kicked in. I chose flight. Maybe not the smartest call, but staying there felt like a death sentence. I ran faster than I ever have, not looking back once. I don't know if it chased me. I didn't hear anything over my own pounding heart. I got inside, locked every door and window, pulled the blinds, and sat against the wall, clutching my gun all night. I didn't sleep a wink, and barely did for days after. Long story short, I don't live there anymore. People talk about Sasquatch being some peaceful part of nature, maybe scary, but mostly just curious. This thing, it was different, evil. It felt like it was stalking me, toying with me, and I'm damn sure it would have killed me if it got the chance. I've never felt that kind of dread since, and I try to shove it out of my mind, but the nightmares still hit. That image is seared into my brain, and I think it'll stay there until I'm dead. The closest thing I've seen to what it looked like are the werewolves from that movie The Howling. That's all I've got to say about it. Back in September 2010, my boyfriend Kieran, his best friend Milo, my best friend Soren, and I were all heading back to our hometown for our final year of college after an incredible summer in London. We'd spent the season living in my uncle's apartment, throwing parties, and wandering through the sprawling chaos of that massive city. It was unforgettable. On our way home, we decided to stop for the night at a bed and breakfast about halfway through the journey, planning to roll into town around 6 p.m. the next day. We woke up early, probably around 4 or 5 a.m., eager to hit the road again, only to find that someone had clearly driven too close to our car overnight and smashed the right wing mirror clean off. That car was a birthday gift from my dad, barely 2 months old, and I was fucking livid that we asked the landlady if she knew where we could find a replacement or at least something temporary to get by. She mentioned she'd passed a makeshift scrap yard a while back. Not sure if it was still there, but she sketched us a rough map anyway. We got back on the road, though I wasn't convinced her directions were spot on. The closer we got to the circled spot, the emptier everything became. The roads turned from stone to dirt, and the landscape shifted. No more farms, just endless weedy grass and clumps of forest. It was basically a wasteland. We were about to give up, figuring I'd just have to suck it up and drive without the mirror. Wild animals be damned, when Kieran pointed ahead to a hand-painted sign. It promised a cafe and car spares 2 miles down the road. So we followed it, driving into a little cove surrounded by trees, and all piled out of the car except Soren, who was still passed out in the back seat. There was a tiny cream-colored hut with cafe spray painted on the roof, a caravan parked nearby, and a heap of twisted metal and car parts, like you'd expect from a scrapyard. We were the only ones there, parked right out front. The sun was up, but the place was dead. No lights, no people. Probably still asleep. I figured it was only about 6 a.m. We wandered over to the scrap pile, and I started digging through it, hunting for a wing mirror or anything reflective I could use until I got the car properly fixed. Milo grabbed some grimy, decade-old mirror and said we should just take it and bounce, but I, being the dumb, honest type, insisted we couldn't just steal it. I had to pay something, so I marched up to the caravan, knocked on the door, and waited. A big, rough-looking guy answered, his face hard and tired at first, then splitting into a creepy, two-tooth grin. He stared at me for a few seconds, leering, until Kieran and Milo walked up behind me. Then he asked what we wanted. Milo handed him the mirror and asked how much. The guy didn't name a price, just said he wanted to get to know us, which I thought was fair enough at first. 2 more men stepped out from the patio door on the other side. Both had shaved heads, meth head teeth, and a stench that hit us from a distance. They grinned too, took the mirror from the first guy, and he told them to go fix it onto our car. Then he introduced himself as Ian, sat us down on some rickety patio chairs, and offered us sandwiches. I said no thanks, but he pushed, insisting we must be starving and telling me to come inside. Said women were best at making sandwiches. I turned him down again, starting to pick up on his sexist bullshit, and when he asked a third time, Kieran snapped that I'd already said no. Ian muttered something under his breath, then plopped down with us. Shit got awkward fast. He started with small talk, how old we were, where we were from, but it quickly turned weird. He asked if I had a boyfriend, and Kieran answered for me. Then he got personal, asking what we liked to do to each other, private stuff like that. We didn't respond, just sat there in silence until a scream cut through the air that we whipped around. Soren was awake, shrieking. One of the guys who was supposed to be fixing the mirror had his hand through the back window, grabbing at her leg. The other one was pacing nervously behind a car. We bolted off the patio. Milo charged after the two guys, but they took off into the forest. Soren was a mess. She'd woken up alone in the car with some creep's hand sliding up her leg. I can't imagine how fucking terrifying that was. I climbed into the back seat to calm her down, while Kieran circled around to the driver's side. He pointed out some nails scattered on the ground, about a dozen of them, arranged around the tire like they were about to puncture it. I didn't get why at the time, but now I wonder where the hell they got all those car parts. We'd had enough. No mirror was worth this shit. We were ready to peel out, mirror or not. Milo was the last to climb in, slamming the back door shut. As we glanced back, Ian came storming out of the house, holding something long. He got closer, and my eyes adjusted. He was carrying a fucking rifle, a hunting rifle that I lost it, sobbing as I floored the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, and we hit 90, tearing over dirt roads and anything in our way until that damn scrapyard was a speck in the rear view. We didn't stop checking behind us until we hit the motorway, safe and sound, heading home. To this day, whenever I go to London, I take the train. I'm still scared shitless I'll run into those bastards again. This happened about 16 years ago when I was 12, during a summer camp with my Boy Scout troop in Spain. It was a mixed group, boys and girls, which is pretty standard there. Scouting's actually kind of liberal in Spain. One of the highlights of camp was the raid, a couple of days trekking outside the main site, all adventure style. My friends, let's call them Elias, Nira, and Cato, and I mapped out this badass route through the Pyrenees in northeastern Spain. 3 days of hiking, 2 nights sleeping under the open sky. Our group was 15 kids, all 12 to 14 years old, loaded up with food, maps, shelter building know-how, water finding skills, everything we needed to survive a few days on our own. No adults tagged along back then. Shit's different now. Day 1, our plan was to climb a mountain just shy of 10,000 feet and camp by a glacial lake near the top. It was a brutal 15-mile haul from base camp, steep as hell, and by around 6 p.m., we realized we weren't going to make it to the lake at a decent hour. So we found a solid spot, built a shelter, and cooked some dinner. We were in the middle of this gorgeous mountain range, about 6 miles from the nearest road. Add another 3 miles to the closest village. We were fucking thrilled. Sunset was still a couple hours off when we finished eating, so we figured we'd send a small crew to wash dishes and refill water at a spring we'd spotted earlier. I volunteered, and Elias, Nira, and Cato came with me. We grabbed a couple of lightweight torches, just in case, and headed out. Night fell while we were hiking back. We could hear the rest of the group in the distance, singing and messing around, when Elias stopped dead and pointed off the trail. That wasn't there before, I'd swear it, he said. It was a road reflector pole, torn to shit, lying in pieces. We went from chilled to spooked in a heartbeat and hauled ass back to the others. We told them what we found, and since we were just kids, the panic spread fast. Who the hell could be out here with us and why? 2 of the older guys, let's say Rune and Soren, both 14, decided to scout around to calm us down, though honestly, them leaving made it worse. They took a torch, a knife, and a whistle so we'd hear if shit hit the fan, then headed off. We stayed huddled in the shelter, just tarps propped up by sticks near a big rock, quiet and scared. I could hear soft sobs around me. All I could think was, I don't want to fucking die here. One girl, maybe Nira, suggested singing to take our minds off it. Some argued we wouldn't hear the whistle, but we did it anyway, low and shaky. We'd been at it for 10 or 20 minutes when the whistle blasted, 2 sharp bursts, getting closer fast. I yanked my knife from its sheath, gripping it tight. Thank God it was just Rune and Soren, sprinting back, out of breath and freaked. They said they'd found a stick rammed into the ground, coated in blood, way more than we could handle. Most of us started crying, some prayed. They said they were going back out to find whoever was out there and deal with them. If it goes bad, run somewhere they can't find you, Rune told us. We begged them to stay, but no one could move to stop them. No more singing, just whimpers and barely audible prayers. I kept thinking, I don't want to die here. I want my family. After what felt like forever, we heard rustling, then their voices. They came back slow this time, relief all over their faces. It's fine, just a misunderstanding, Soren said. It's a park ranger. He was patrolling, said the bloody stick was from a rabbit he hunted for dinner, Rune added. We all exhaled, tension easing. Someone even mentioned breaking out the sleeping bags, and it sounded like heaven. But then Rune piped up, I'm not so sure. He wasn't in uniform. No badge either, Soren said. Who the fuck walks miles from a road at night to hunt rabbits? Are there even rabbits up here? Terror slammed back into us. They were right. His story was bullshit. Let's go find him and threaten his ass, Rune said. We pleaded again. Same result. They left. This time, we were a mess. No one listened to anyone else. No crying. No praying. My only thought was, I'd rather kill than die in this shithole. We sat there, knives out, ready to fight. Minutes dragged on. Then we heard running, screams, more than two voices. I'd never been so fucking scared. I wanted to say goodbye to my mom, my dad, my sister. Knife in hand, I was set to stab anything that moved. Finally, we saw Rune and Soren running for their lives, chased by two men. They stopped at the shelter's entrance. The men did too. Then we saw their faces. It was our camp leaders, laughing their asses off, asking if we were scared. It was a fucking prank the whole time that we all broke down, some hyperventilating from the panic. It took a minute for those four assholes to realize what they'd done. Pushed 13 kids to the edge, knives out, ready to kill. We calmed down eventually, but our fear turned to rage. That joke was so far past fucked up, it defied common sense. They apologized over and over, but we didn't give a shit. We wanted them gone, though we were still too scared to sleep alone, so we grudgingly let them stay. It took months to trust them again. Worst night of my life, no question. I've never had nightmares about it, but it's crystal clear, like yesterday. Now that I'm older, I wonder what would have happened if it was two killers out there. We were kids, sure, but armed and ready. I'm a journalist now, and I can't help picturing the headline. 2 murderers stabbed to death in mountains by 13 children. Shit was wilder back then, and Scouts has definitely cleaned up its act since. When I was in my early 20s, I had a friend named Vesper whose dad was a psychotic drunk. She didn't live with him. He'd moved to this remote little coastal town, and every now and then, we'd go visit him together and crash there overnight. My vibe with him was creepy as hell on its own, but that's not the point here. One night, while we were staying over, Vesper and her dad got into a massive, booze-fueled blowout. He lost his shit and kicked us out of the house around midnight. We took the elevator down, no car to our name, and started walking. Her dad's place was about 4 kilometers outside town, just a dirt road with a huddle of 2 or 3 shops at the end. Our plan was to hoof it to the town's phone booth. Back then, mobile phones weren't a thing for us, so I could call my folks, who lived an hour and a half away, to come pick us up. The whole way there, Vesper was a mess, drunkenly sobbing and ranting about her fucked up relationship with her dad. She didn't let up even when we reached the phone booth. We plopped down on a bench next to it while I dialed my parents, waking them up. They said they'd come get us, so I sat back down for the long wait. Not long after, a van rolled up and parked maybe 5 meters behind us. 2 young guys were in the front seats, staring at us. If that didn't already set me on edge, the side door slid open, and I saw more guys in the back. Couldn't tell how many, but definitely more than 2. The spot was deserted, no houses, no cars passing, just empty roads stretching out. It was a shitty little nowhere town. I stood up to get a better look, keeping my eyes locked on that van. Fully aware of how screwed we were if shit went south, they were staring back, talking among themselves, quiet at first, then loud enough for us to hear. They were doing it on purpose, saying stuff about dragging us into the van, taking us somewhere to fuck us up and kill us. I can't recall the exact words, but that was the gist. My whole body was shaking, not just trembling but fucking quaking with fear. I couldn't look away. One guy's face burned into my memory, sitting in the doorway, dead eyes, looking at me like I was nothing. I could draw him even now. Vesper was still bawling, oblivious to the van for all I knew. I knew I had to warn her, but I was so goddamn terrified I couldn't move or speak. Then the wildest thing happened. Vesper's dad, who never apologized to a soul in his miserable life, rolled up in his car, still drunk. It was insane. He could hold a grudge like a fucking champion and was stubborn as hell. He and Vesper had this teary reunion right there, but my eyes never left the van. The guys had gone quiet, just watching. "Let's go," I said, and we piled into her dad's car, heading back to his place. The van started up and followed us. I tried explaining the situation to her dad, but he brushed it off, saying, "I'll just slow down, they'll pass." They didn't. They crawled behind us, then started yelling threats out the windows. They tailed us the whole way down that dirt road and right into his driveway. We sat there in the car, then parked behind us, waiting to see what the fuck they'd do. His neighbors' places were all vacation homes, emptied at night. If those bastards got out and followed through, we were fucked, no help coming. After what felt like forever, the van finally backed out and took off. My parents showed up in a panic, couldn't find us at the shops, and Vesper's dad hid out, ashamed. I went home with my folks. People ask if I called the cops, but I don't think I did. I can't remember. It was a messed up time in my life. That night fucked me up for good though. I'm paranoid as hell now, crazy overprotective of my kids, and I don't want to change. I'd rather be this way than accidentally trust one of the million psychos out there. This happened last year, just after school started. My only kid, little Isolde, was in kindergarten. She'd only been going a few days. We live way out in a rural area, down a dead-end dirt road, and we've just got one car. Mornings, me, Isolde, and my husband, Torvald, pile in to drop him off at work. Then Isolde and I head back home to get her ready for school. Since we're so far out, we drive about half a mile to the main road where her bus picks her up. That morning went smooth. I got her on the bus and came back home. I had the day off from my part-time job, which is an unusual midweek, so I was tackling some housework, cleaning, folding laundry. I went into Isolde's room to hang up some clothes in her closet, the TV blaring in the living room while I worked. Then I heard it, a soft, muffled cough. I froze. What the fuck was that? I stood there, paralyzed, my mind racing. Maybe the cat was outside her window, hacking up a hairball? Could it be the TV? Yeah, probably the TV, right? It's nothing. But I was stuck, clutching a shirt and hanger, not moving a damn muscle. No clue what to do. Then I thought, screw this, I'll get my father-in-law to check it out. Fuck it, I said out loud, dropped the shirt, and bolted next door. My in-laws live a football field away, and my father-in-law, Rune, is on disability, always home, mid-60s, hooked to an oxygen tank most days. I don't know what I thought he could do to save me, but I was freaked out and didn't want to be alone. Plus, he's a hunter, and hunters have guns. I ran faster than I ever have, bursting through his back door yelling his name. He shuffled out of the kitchen, pissed that I just scared the shit out of him. I was near tears, babbling so fast he couldn't keep up, begging him to come check my house because I thought someone was inside. He asked if I was sure. I said yes, pleading. He grabbed his gun, and we drove over in his truck. I stayed locked inside it, freaking out, scanning every direction while he went in. It felt like forever. Finally, he came out and asked if I'd left a pack of Newports by Isolde's bed, right on the floor. I smoked Camels, never touched Newports in my life. I told him no, they weren't mine. His eyes went wide, panic creeping in, and he told me to stay put and call the cops. He handed me his phone, and I dialed 911. The operator said state troopers had to come since we're outside town limits. It'd take a damn hour to get out here. I'd already called Torvald at work. He got his brothers, Soren and Leif, to come get me. It's not far, so they showed up in 20 minutes. Rune, Torvald, and Soren started combing the woods around our houses. Nothing. No one but us. Eventually, the state trooper rolled up, checked around, found zilch. He took the cigarettes as evidence, got my statement and Rune's, but said there wasn't much he could do. I didn't see anyone, just heard a sound and found some smokes. Nothing stolen, no forced entry, of course not. We're in the middle of fucking nowhere. Who locks their doors? I felt like an idiot, but no one around here does. The key's just chilling on top of the outdoor fridge for emergencies. After the trooper left, Rune gave Torvald the gun to keep, just in case. Torvald and Soren swapped out all our locks that day. Now we carry keys and lock up tight. We didn't pull Isolde from school. She was only 5, and we didn't want to stress her out. We told the school to watch for weird shit, though, and drilled her on stranger danger, what to do if someone she doesn't know shows up. She slept in our bed for a couple weeks, but then wanted her room back. She's not a baby anymore. That was it. Life went on, no word from the trooper, no more incidents. I've got no clue what they wanted, me, Isolde, or just to rob us blind. I'll probably never know. I still get paranoid as fuck sometimes, hate being home alone. Torvald got me a dog for company and protection. I hope the fear fades eventually. Lock your damn doors. No matter how safe you think your spot is, you never know who's just passing through. This went down about 14 years ago when I was 12, living on a 40-acre property smack in the middle of an Australian rainforest on the east side. When I say rainforest, I mean our house was surrounded by dense bush. The place belonged to a Swiss guy named Torin, who'd swing by every so often with his tractor to slash the overgrown grass around the house, so we could actually use a bit more of the land. In summer, that was a godsend. Australia's crawling with nasty fuckers that can kill you quick. We were a 40-minute drive from the nearest small town, so groceries, doctor visits, or calling our parents from school meant a hell of a trek. The house sat 3/4 up a big mountain, so most of our land was all valleys, nooks, and hidden spots. We had trails leading to a stream and a little waterfall, 5 or 6 meters high. It was gorgeous but scared the shit out of me and my younger siblings, Lyrian and Cato, that we knew our neighbors on both sides. But being so remote, they were a 10-minute drive away. One was a sweet old lady, Maris, who'd wave at us when we got off the school bus before we hiked home. Think my parents asked her to keep an eye on us. The other was a dickhead middle-aged guy, Vigo, with his family. He'd dig up the land near our lower boundary, fucking up the stream and waterfall's clean flow. Weird, creepy shit happens when you're out in the sticks, but one run-in with a guy I never want to see again takes the cake. We almost never got random visitors. Someone showing up unannounced usually meant they were lost and needed directions. But one day, this dude in a utility truck came roaring down our driveway. I ran inside to tell my dad someone weird was here. He went out to check it out while my mom kept us inside. On edge, got a quick bit about my dad. Rune, he's the toughest bastard you'll ever meet. Lost a leg years back in a motorcycle crash while dodging the cops. Ex-Navy, raised in a strict house in a rough part of Sydney's west. He's got shady contacts and a vibe like he might have killed someone before us kids came along. You don't fuck with him. So he steps out to see what's up, and this guy's got a big red fur dog in the truck. Looked like a German Shepherd mix. It snarled at Rune, but cowered when the guy snapped at it to shut up. Our dog, Sigrid, total beast killer, by the way, was losing her shit, chained up inside. Hey, I'm Jorvik, the guy says, all slick and salesman-like, friendly but with an edge like he wanted something. Rune cut straight to it. So what the fuck are you doing here, Jorvik? What do you want? That threw him off. He wasn't used to someone coming at him hard. They talked for a bit, and I could hear Rune sounding confused. I caught him saying, "What are you thinking? Just call the cops. Later, I learned Maris, the old lady next door, had died. Jorvik said he'd gone to see her, found her dead, and asked Rune if they should move the body to help the police investigate. Rune told him to call the fucking cops right then. That night, the police showed up to take Rune's statement. Jorvik stuck around our place till they arrived. Rune pulled an officer aside, saying Jorvik had wanted to move the body when he first got there. P.S. I know all this from asking my mom back then and Rune years later. The cops left, no big questions, it seemed like natural causes. Jorvik was still at our house, and he creeped me out. His fake smile, those dark eyes. He acted like he belonged, strumming his guitar while I tried watching TV. It was a school night, and he was fucking up my shows. I told my mom I wanted him gone, that he was weird. She grinned and said she felt the same, then sent me to bed. Next day felt normal, school, home, but passing Maris's place without her wave stung. I was bummed walking up the driveway until I saw Jorvik's truck again out front. I got closer, and his dog, Rusty, greeted me. He came out with Rune, called Rusty to the truck, and left, said he'd been borrowing tools. He waved like I'd miss him, that overfamiliar bullshit making me uneasy. I didn't know him, didn't like him, hoped he'd stay gone. Rune pulled me aside, asked what I thought of Jorvik. Weirdo, I said, hoping he wouldn't come back. But that night, he did, returning Rune's tools, sitting there playing guitar, pissing everyone off. My mom and Rune were done with him. They argued about him hanging around until Rune told him to get the fuck out. It was bedtime. Jorvik whined it was early, fishing for excuses. That was odd as hell. I knew when I wasn't wanted. Why didn't he? After pushing him out, Rune and my mom had a big talk. Rune said he didn't like Jorvik, and if we saw him again, tell him fast. He'd tell him to fuck off for good. Next day was Saturday. We were setting up our cheap inflatable pool since it was warm. Around 11 a.m., a car thundered down the driveway. I ran out, saw Jorvik, and bolted back to tell Rune. Same as the first time, Rune went out. We stayed in with my mom, listening through the screen door. Jorvik hit Rune with that creepy, too familiar smile and dark eyes. Rune laid into him. Look, mate, I don't know who you think you are, but I don't want you here. You scare my kids and wife. Don't come back, got it? Jorvik's tone sounded confused, trying to argue, but Rune wasn't having it. Told him to leave or he'd call the cops. As he peeled out, Jorvik's face twisted into rage, flipping us off, yelling shit, and spraying gravel at the house. Rune came back, said we wouldn't see him again, and if we did, we'd call the police. I was relieved. That fucker made my home feel wrong, and his exit proved my gut right. But he came back, Sunday or Monday, trying to apologize. Before he could get out of the truck, Rune said, "Turn around and leave, or I'll smash your fucking face in." He did. Rune called the cops, said they'd talk to Jorvik. We didn't hear more. Weeks passed, no sign of him, until our mailbox got ripped out and smashed. Rune knew it was Jorvik after their last run-in. Next week, we went to town for groceries and fast food. A treat. Coming back, Rune stopped my mom short. Something was off. A bathroom window by the carport was gone. He got intense, and then we saw him, Jorvik, dark eyes, climbing out. Rune exploded, telling my mom to gun it down the driveway so we could fuck him up. Jorvik bolted out the window, running into the thick lantana, thorny as shit, down the hill. Rune, one-legged, let Sigrid loose. She tore after him but came back empty. Rune searched with a flashlight. Nothing. No one slept much. Nothing was taken or moved. We must have caught him breaking in. The police came next day, found no prints, and Rune told them about Jorvik's weird shit. They said they'd look into it. Last we heard. That year, I forgot him, enjoying summer and gearing up for high school. It was a big school, but everyone knew each other. First week, we met the staff, and there he was, Jorvik, now Gregor, a teacher's aide. I freaked, piecing it together. Was he a killer? Did he frame Rune? What else was he lying about? He saw me, eyes wide, shocked. He knew I knew. I told Rune that night. He was floored, asked if I was sure. Next day, Gregor took indefinite leave, might not come back. Rune told me to watch out and tell him if Jorvik or Gregor ever showed up again.